Welcome back to On the Roll with Matt. Today, I want to sit with a truth that most of us understand intellectually but struggle to live out practically. Wanting change and creating change are not the same thing. Wanting change is easy to admire, creating change is harder to sustain. Because wanting change often lives in the emotional part of us, it sounds like, I wish my life was different. I wish my habits were better. I wish my pain was lighter. I wish my mind was quieter. I wish my circumstances would shift. And there is nothing wrong with wanting something better. But desire by itself does not transform us. Desire can identify the ache, it can point to what is missing, it can reveal the gap between where we are and where we long to be. But desire is not discipline. Desire is not healing. Desire is not structure. Desire is not surrender. Desire is not a plan. Creating change requires participation. It requires us to examine the patterns we keep repeating, the stories we keep protecting, the pain we keep avoiding, and the responsibilities we keep handing away. That is where change becomes uncomfortable because real change does not simply ask, what do I want? It asks, what am I willing to confront? What am I willing to practice? What am I willing to release? What am I willing to stop excusing? What am I willing to rebuild? Behavioral health and psychology remind us that human beings are not changed by intention alone. We are shaped by repeated behavior, environment, thought patterns, relationships, coping mechanisms, attachment wounds, belief systems, trauma responses, and the meaning we attach to our experiences. So, if we want ongoing change, we can not only look at the surface, we have to look at the system. What feeds the behavior? What rewards the habit? What fear keeps the pattern alive? What environment reinforces the same cycle? What wound is still asking for attention? Because sometimes what we call a bad habit is actually a survival strategy that has outlived its usefulness. Sometimes what looks like resistance is fear. Sometimes what looks like laziness is exhaustion. Sometimes what looks like anger is grief. Sometimes what looks like control is anxiety trying to feel safe. But understanding the root does not mean we surrender to the pattern. Insight is not the finish line. Insight is the doorway. At some point, we have to take what we understand and begin living differently. And this is where we need a mature conversation about control. There are things in life we can change, there are things we can influence, and there are things we have to learn how to carry with wisdom. As someone living with a disability, I know there are parts of my reality I cannot simply conquer with motivation. I cannot outwork a progressive condition. I cannot shame my body into being something it is not. I cannot pretend that physical limitations, fatigue, grief, or uncertainty are not part of the equation. And the same is true for mental health. People do not simply snap out of trauma, anxiety, depression, addiction, or deep emotional pain because someone told them to try harder. That mindset lacks depth, it lacks compassion, and honestly, it lacks wisdom. But the opposite extreme is also dangerous because if we decide that every struggle makes us powerless, we risk giving our pain full authority over our future. So the question becomes deeper than, can I change this? The better question is, what kind of change is actually available to me here? Maybe I cannot change the disability, but I can change how I support my body. Maybe I cannot change the diagnosis, but I can change how I seek help. Maybe I cannot erase the past, but I can change how much power it has over my present. Maybe I cannot control every thought, but I can learn which thoughts deserve my obedience. Maybe I cannot remove every limitation, but I can still build a life with meaning inside the limits. That is not denial. That is wisdom. That is the difference between fantasy and responsibility. Fantasy says everything should be different before I can live. Responsibility says this is what is real. Now, what can still be built? For me, this is deeply connected to my faith in God. God gives me an anchor when life feels unstable. He reminds me that surrender is not passivity. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is releasing the illusion that I have to control everything while still being faithful with what has been placed in my hands. Faith does not remove the work of change, it gives the work meaning. It reminds me that I am not defined by my weakest day, my hardest limitation, my worst fear, or my most painful season. But I also recognize that not everyone watching comes from a Christian or spiritual worldview. For some, the anchor may be therapy. For others, community. For others, mindfulness, philosophy, recovery, nature, service, family, purpose, or simply the decision to live with greater honesty. But every worldview that leads to real growth eventually has to face this. Peace without responsibility becomes avoidance, and responsibility without compassion becomes cruelty. We need both. We need grace, but not excuses. We need truth, but not shame. We need support, but not enablement. We need challenge, but not condemnation. Healthy challenge is not an attack. Healthy challenge is an invitation to stop living beneath what is possible. And sometimes the most loving thing someone can say is, I hear your pain, and I still believe you are capable of taking the next step. Not the whole staircase, not the entire mountain, the next step. Because change is rarely dramatic at first. It is quiet, it is repetitive, it is inconvenient, it is deeply unglamorous. It is choosing the meeting, choosing the prayer, choosing the therapy appointment, choosing the boundary, choosing the apology, choosing the routine, choosing the hard conversation, choosing to pause before reacting, choosing to tell the truth instead of performing strength. Over time, those choices begin to form a new identity, not because life became easy, but because we stopped letting chaos be the architect of our character. That is ongoing change. It is not a mood. It is not a motivational quote. It is not a burst of inspiration. It is the slow construction of a life that no longer agrees with every impulse, every fear, every wound, or every old version of yourself. And that kind of change requires humility because we have to admit that some of our suffering is not our fault, but some of our patterns are still our responsibility. That is a hard truth, but it is also a freeing one because responsibility means there is still room to move. There is still room to grow. There is still room to respond differently. There is still room to become more whole, even if life does not become less complicated. So today, I want to challenge you with respect. Do not only ask yourself what you want to change, ask what change is asking of you. Is it asking for discipline? Is it asking for surrender? Is it asking for support? Is it asking for honesty? Is it asking for boundaries? Is it asking you to stop confusing comfort with healing? Is it asking you to grieve what you cannot control while still building with what you can? Because wanting change may awaken something in you, but creating change will require something from you. And if there is one thing I have learned through disability, sobriety, faith, and life itself, it is this: we do not always get to choose the weight we carry, but we can learn how to carry it with more wisdom, more humility, more courage, and more purpose. Change is not always the removal of struggle. Sometimes change is becoming the kind of person who is no longer ruled by the struggle. Thanks for coming back to On the Roll with Matt. If this challenged you or encouraged you, please like, comment, and share. And let me know, where in your life are you moving from simply wanting change to actually creating it? See you next time.